Hello everyone, my name is Amelia. I use she/her pronouns, and I'm a member of the Denver Communists and Firebrand. Today we'll be discussing the book Value, Price, and Profit by Karl Marx. Value, Price, and Profit is a series of lectures delivered to the First International that was later published into a book. In this text, Marx seeks to understand and illustrate some of the characteristics of capitalism and argue against the theory of John Weston, a utopian socialist. Weston argued that wage increases would not benefit workers as the capital pool available for the wages would stay the same. Weston also argued that increasing wages would lead to increased commodity prices, as capitalists would raise their goods to maintain profits. Marx begins refuting Weston's two main premises. Firstly, that the amount of national production is a constant, and secondly, that the amount of real wages is also a constant. Marx argues against the idea that national production is a fixed entity. He points out that the value and volume of production, along with productive capacity of labor, increases over time. This change is continuous and not static, influenced by factors like capital accumulation and improvements in labor productivity. Marx goes on to humor Weston and asserts that even if national production was constant, it wouldn't imply that wages are fixed. He explains that within a given total of production, the proportion of profits and wages can change. For instance, if the total value is 8, with profits at 6 and wages at 2, it is possible for wages to rise to 6 and profits to fall to 2 without changing the total. Marx highlights that Weston's argument is one-sided and inconsistent. If wages are indeed fixed, as Weston claims, they cannot be increased or decreased. However, Weston only applies this principle to argue against wage increases, ignoring that it should also apply to wage decreases initiated by the capitalists. Marx notes that according to Weston's logic, any attempt to decrease wages by capitalists should face a reaction, just as attempts by workers to increase wages should. Therefore, workers are justified in resisting wage reductions and striving for wage increases. He then criticizes the idea that wage levels are simply at the discretion of capitalists, challenging the notion that differences in wages between countries, like the USA and England, are solely due to the differing wills of capitalists. This implies a struggle between the two classes, making this not only an economic system, but a political one as well, with a power struggle between classes. Marx acknowledges that while wage increases might initially raise prices for necessities due to increased demand, this effect would be offset by decreased demand and lower prices for non-essentials. He points out that different industries would be affected variably, with capital and labor eventually reallocating to restore market equilibrium. Marx asserts that any market disturbances caused by wage increases are temporary, with overall demand remaining constant and prices stabilizing over time. To support his argument, he references the historical example of Great Britain between 1949 and 1959, where wage increases did not lead to prolonged economic downturns or rising commodity prices, demonstrating the adaptability and dynamicism of the economy in response to changes in wages. Marx shifts focus to wages correlation with the value of currency, with Weston believing that a general increase in wages would necessitate more currency under a fixed currency system. However, this is contested by highlighting the efficiency of the banking system, especially in England, where less physical currency is needed to circulate the same amount of value. The comparison with other European countries shows that lower wages can circulate with a higher amount of currency, suggesting that wage levels and currency needs aren't directly correlated. Even significant wage increases could be accommodated within the existing currency system through the use of banknotes, coins, and other financial instruments like bills or checks. Historical examples, such as the fluctuations in the cotton industry, further demonstrate that wage changes do not necessarily lead to proportional changes in the amount of currency or in the commodity prices. Marx challenges the notion of what constitutes high and low wages, arguing that these terms are relative and lack a fixed meaning without a standard measure derived from economic laws. He points out that simply labeling wages as high or low is meaningless without understanding the underlying factors that determine their value. Additionally, Marx argues that supply and demand, often cited as the determinants of wage levels, only explains temporary market fluctuations but do not define the intrinsic value of labor. He emphasizes that supply and demand can equilibrate market prices with real values, but they do not establish these values. Essentially, Marx asserts that a deeper analysis of the nature of value is needed, going beyond the superficial effects of the market forces like supply and demand on wages and commodity prices. The value of a commodity is not merely relative, but is fundamentally linked to the amount of socially necessary labor required for its production. Social labor is the labor that contributes to the total labor of society. This value is distinct from wages paid for labor. Commodities are considered the crystallizations of social labor, and their value is measured by the labor time invested in them. Market prices fluctuate around these values, aligning with them over longer periods despite short-term variations. Profits in the economy are not derived from selling commodities above their value, but by selling them at their true value, which is determined by the embedded labor. This concept counters everyday observations, presenting a more scientific understanding of how value and price operate in the economy. Marx explains that the value of labor, often misconceived as the price of labor itself, is actually the value of laboring power, the capacity to work. This laboring power is what workers sell, not their labor itself. Its value is determined by the amount of labor needed to produce, maintain, and perpetuate it, including the costs of living and reproducing the labor force. This concept challenges the notion of equal wages, as different kinds of laboring power have different values based on their production costs. Therefore, the call for equal wages under our current system is unrealistic. The market dynamic, where one group continually buys laboring power for profit while the other sells it for survival, results in the historical processes that separated workers from the means of their production. This state will continue until a significant change in the production mode occurs. The value of laboring power, like any other commodity, is not determined by what is right or equal, but by the necessities required for its production and maintenance. Comparing the value of a laborer's work versus the value of their laboring power, we come to a new concept, surplus value. Marx says that if a laborer's necessities are produced by 6 hours of labor, equivalent to 3 shillings, then 3 shillings represents the daily value of the laborer's power. A wage laborer sells this laboring power to a capitalist. If the laborer works 6 hours and is paid 3 shillings, he receives an exact equivalent for his laboring power. However, the capitalist aims to extract more value, extending the workday beyond the time needed to earn the wage. For instance, if a laborer works 12 hours instead of 6, the additional 6 hours represents surplus labor, creating surplus value for the capitalist. The laborer produces more value than his wage, with the excess going to the capitalist. This mechanism underpins the capitalist production system. The surplus value rate depends on the proportion of the working day beyond what is needed to earn the laborer's wage. The longer the laborer works beyond this point, the higher the surplus value for the capitalist. Marx then circles back to the concept of the value of labor, clarifying that the commonly understood value or price of labor is actually the value of the laboring power, based on the cost of maintaining the worker. This distinction is obscured because workers perceive their wages, received after their labor is performed, as the value of their labor, rather just than their capacity to work. This creates an illusion that all labor performed is paid, despite a significant being unpaid surplus labor that generates profit for the capitalist. He states that this illusion distinguishes wage labor from other forms of labor, like slavery or serfdom, where the divide between paid and unpaid labor is more apparent. In wage labor systems, The unpaid labor appears voluntary due to the wage contract, masking the exploitation inherent in this system. This process, where the capitalist profits from surplus labor or unpaid labor of the worker, is a fundamental aspect of the capitalist system. Marx analyzes situations where workers seek higher wages or resist wage reductions, emphasizing that these actions respond to economic changes. Wages are linked to the cost of living, determined by the labor needed to produce daily necessities. If this cost changes due to productivity shifts, it affects wages and profits. For example, a rise in living costs requires more labor to maintain the same standard of living, reducing capitalist profit margins from surplus labor. Conversely, increased productivity can lower living costs, potentially boosting profits but diminishing workers' relative social status. Additionally, monetary value changes, like gold depreciation, necessitate wage adjustments to preserve real income. The length of the workday is also contested. Capitalists seek to extend it for more surplus labor, while workers aim to limit it for their well-being. Marx argues that wage adjustment struggles are the rational response to maintain labor value amidst market and productivity fluctuations inherent in capitalism. This puts into perspective the inherent struggles between capital and labor in the wage system, emphasizing that labor, treated as a commodity, is subject to market price fluctuations. He notes that while labor's value is partially determined by physical needs, it's also influenced by historical and social factors, which can vary widely between different societies. The struggle for wage increases often reflects efforts to maintain the existing value of labor in response to the economic changes. Marx argues that the development of industry tends to favor capitalists, as technological advances and capital accumulation can lead to a relative surplus labor, driving down wages. This dynamic demonstrates that labor's resistance to capital's encroachments is necessary, but often focused on immediate effects rather than systemic change. Marx concludes that trade unions should aim not to just resist capitalistic pressures, but also to abolish the wage system altogether.